In 1953, American professor Charles Hampton published an article claiming that before people came to Earth, another advanced civilization already existed. This idea seemed completely unbelievable at the time, but later the CIA classified parts of his work as secret documents. After all, our planet has existed for over 4.5 billion years, and Homo sapiens appeared about 300,000 years ago. Are we sure that during such a long period, Earth did not host any other beings besides humans? Recent discoveries in this area will definitely make you question everything we know. In this video, we will consider the possibility that another civilization developed on Earth millions of years before the rise of humanity. Let's get started. The unknowns of the past are filled with many gaps discussed in general terms by scientists. These paradoxes is the construction of the pyramids. While researchers claim that people were merely primitive communities at that time, who built these monumental structures? Here is the Chichen Itza Pyramid in Mexico, the tomb of Pharaoh Jose in Egypt, and the Kok Kher Temple in Cambodia. Interestingly, they are all built according to the same principle, but at completely different times. Some similarities between these monuments question human history altogether. The stones on the walls fit together so perfectly that even a human hair cannot be squeezed through the gaps, and all of this is done without any adhesive mortar. Walls with a similar structure have been found in areas near Cusco, Peru, as well as in Greece, Japan, and even Easter Island. Many of these locations are separated by vast oceans. It is predicted that all these structures were built by the same culture, a culture far more advanced than the people of that time. Of course, such a theory may seem like a fantasy right now, but how can we discover the traces of an ancient civilization if we haven't at least started looking? This view is also shared by Jason Wright, a leading astronomer from Pennsylvania State University. Some of the most mysterious phenomena of antiquity are considered to be the incredible technological achievements of the Indus Valley civilization. In 1829, in a place within the borders of present-day Pakistan, explorer Charles Mason accidentally stumbled upon the ruins of a city called Haramba. This city planning was unique. It were precisely aligned from north to south and east to west. But what is the purpose behind this careful arrangement? According to the findings of archaeologists, many residents of this prehistoric capital had their own pools, and they carefully built these pools with technological features. There was a perfect system where the builders covered the bottom of the pools with resin to make them leak-proof, fresh water coming through specially designed pipes, and a sophisticated drainage system that efficiently removed wastewater. Meanwhile, other civilizations were struggling to build even basic barracks. However, it's impossible to build such pools without special tools. People of the Indus civilization seem to know how to use complex iron tools long before the rest of the world. Most interestingly, scientists were actually able to confirm this bold thesis in 1936, based on findings in a completely different region. During excavations near the village of Saqqara in Egypt, archaeologists unearthed huge granite boxes used in burial ceremonies, which they called cerupium. Egyptologists claim that these boxes were made during the 18th dynasty between 1550 and 1300 BC, but at that time the Egyptians used almost no metal tools. How could they have created these granite boxes with perfectly straight angles and remarkably flat and thin walls? Moreover, on the walls of some of these boxes, scientists discovered strange marks and peculiar grooves. Don't you think we've seen something similar before, like the grooves made by modern drills? Could a more advanced civilization have contributed to the development of ancient Egyptian society with its complex equipment? But why do we still know so little about such an advanced culture? The answer to this question seems to lie with astrophysicist Adam Frank and climate scientist Gavin Schmidt. In 2017, scientists tried to imagine what traces we would leave behind if our civilization suddenly disappeared one day. The answer was clear. Giant megacities would continue to exist without humans, perhaps only covered with a thick layer of moss. If those before us also built a civilization, we would have already discovered it. Archaeological excavations would help us in this regard, but despite centuries of searching, people have not yet found prehistoric skyscrapers. Does this mean that they never existed, or is everything not as obvious as it seems? According to Adam Frank and Gavin Schmidt, our cities will disappear from Earth in just 10,000 years, leaving behind randomly scattered giant rocks. This doesn't say much about the development of our civilization, does it? So apparently, only archaeology can help us find the closest evidence. However, as time passes, the traces descend underground and eventually turn to dust. There is very little evidence left even from Neanderthals, who lived only tens of thousands of years ago. What if a society built its own civilization on Earth before them? You will probably mention plastic materials that disappear much later than organic materials. Would we at least find their traces? If there really was an advanced civilization before us, they must have left such waste. However, according to researcher Alan Weissman, activities right now, a significant portion of our plastic waste could decompose in just 20,000 years due to ultraviolet rays and bacteria. And if, for example, a global disaster wiped out the previous civilization, their traces would disappear even faster. However, some survivors would settle in different regions and pass on their knowledge to different cultures, which could be an explanation for how ancient Egypt and the Indus civilizations reached such high levels. What makes the problem even more complicated is that less than 3% of the Earth's surface is settled today. Even if the previous civilization had left waste like plastic, finding it would be more difficult than finding a single grain of sand on a large beach. How can we be sure that a society like ours existed a billion years ago, when the Earth was just beginning to form? That is, 4.5 billion years ago, the climate was much more challenging than it is today. Our planet was constantly bombarded by meteors and comets, and the atmosphere contained mostly water vapor, carbon dioxide, ammonia, and methane. No known species could survive under such harsh conditions, but perhaps all this provided an ideal environment for completely different beings. Max Bernstein, head of NASA's Science Mission Directorate in Washington, D.C., believes that a civilization would have to be quite capable in such a climate. After all, just as other beings may not understand even the basic aspects of life, such as reproduction or metabolism, he says that there may also be living beings with the ability to transmit information from generation to generation, which is a fundamental criterion for the functioning of life. But the tools used for this could be anything. In this case, billions of years ago, an entire society may have been developed without even the help of DNA molecules. When a crystal grows, new atoms adhere to its surface layer by layer, and if a small crystal sheet breaks off, it is quite similar to the birth of a new organism. Moreover, such a civilization may not leave any traces behind. So should we stop searching altogether, or do humans still have a chance to find their prehistoric ancestors? Can an advanced civilization really leave no evidence at all? According to Adam Frank and Gavin Schmidt, we should continue to look for something. Physical evidence may be short-lived, but what about the indirect impact on our planet? Structures and mechanisms may have long since been broken down into atoms, but couldn't these atoms have affected the composition of the Earth's crust? Schmidt and Frank stated that any industrial civilization would need energy to exist. This meant that they needed additional energy sources such as oil, coal, or even large amounts of wood. These energy-intensive industrial processes, especially waste, would certainly have left physico-chemical traces in the depths of our planet. Therefore, it seems that we should not look for the remains of old factories, but for emissions from production. Schmidt describes this as looking for fingerprints to find the culprit during a criminal investigation. In such cases, we first try to gather maximum information and then start looking for the culprit. So why don't we apply the same method in the search for an ancient civilization? First of all, we should pay attention to places where radioactive elements accumulate, because it is unlikely that they will come to Earth on their own. This strangely takes us back to the mysterious Indus Valley civilization. During excavations in the state of Rajasthan in northwestern India, archaeologists discovered a layer of radioactive ash. But these incredible findings did not end there. In 1977, researcher David Davenport began excavating the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro and came across a pit with a diameter of 50 meters. All the stones inside seemed to have melted, and these stones had turned into a glass-like substance. However, such a phenomenon could only occur at high temperatures up to 1,500 degrees Celsius. This gave the impression that an ancient nuclear explosion had taken place in the Indus Valley civilization. Strangely, ancient legends seem to confirm these bold speculations. The Mahabharata is one of the greatest epics of Indian literature and has great cultural significance, not only in India, but also in many different parts of the world. In the pages of this work, There are details about an explosion bright enough to burn entire nations, even as bright as 10,000 suns. It also describes that after such an explosion, the survivors lost their nails and hair, and the soil and food were contaminated. Doesn't this exactly resemble the consequences of the nuclear disaster in Hiroshima? However, even if the representatives of the Indus Valley civilization were advanced enough to produce nuclear weapons even at that time, they were still human. So what about pre-human communities? Interestingly, there have been hyperthermia periods in our planet's history when the temperature suddenly increased in many different regions, as in human activity. 56 million years ago, a similar event occurred on Earth, and the average temperature rose to 20 degrees even at the poles. It was not possible to link this extreme temperature increase to human activity. Scientists blamed cyanobacteria, known as blue-green algae, living in the oceans during this period. The population of these bacteria in the oceans increased hundreds of times. However, it was still a mystery how cyanobacteria could affect the climate. Or were they byproducts of a more advanced community? This type of fungus, a subspecies of a fungus, had the ability to eat radioactive waste and could also clean the area around it. At this point, should we see ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution? Perhaps pre-human communities like these bacteria have also developed themselves too much. According to one theory, civilization rises on Earth every million years, reaches its peak, and then collapses and starts again. Is this part of Earth's life cycle, or are all these hypotheses completely imaginary? In the end, despite all the speculation about the existence of ancient civilizations, we have no definitive proof. But these questions make us question and want to go beyond the known. Perhaps we are taking the first steps towards discovering deeper truths that we, as humanity, have not yet begun to understand. The investigation and discovery of prehistoric traces may inspire the future work of researchers and scientists, and perhaps these traces may help us see the bigger picture of how life evolved on our planet and in the universe. Scientists call the time period from the Industrial Revolution to the present day the Anthropocene Age. This is a period in which human activities tend to increase global temperatures, and it is also called the Age of Man. We know that similar global warming periods occurred in the past. So could there be a similarity between today's human-induced climate change and the warm periods millions of years ago? To investigate the answer to this question, the scientific world took action and began to ask whether previous temperature increases could have contributed to the development of intelligent life forms. To find the answer to this question, the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies stepped in. At this point, the question of whether another civilization existed in Earth's 4-5 billion year history came to the fore. However, finding what traces these civilizations left behind is a very challenging task. Schmidt and Frank tried to predict the geological traces that the Anthropocene period will leave in the future, investigated how extreme temperatures and sea levels could leave traces in sedimentary rocks. They thought that these traces should bear similarities to the traces of past extreme hot periods. They also made efforts to understand whether climate changes were caused by human hands or natural causes. Schmidt and his team conducted a study they called the Silurian hypothesis, while searching for clues to the existence of intelligent life forms in the pre-human period. However, finding and interpreting such traces requires a very challenging process. In the future, will remains be found on Earth that indicate the existence of intelligent beings? Or have these traces disappeared over time? Traces from the pre-human period may not be obvious. Therefore, researchers are working to find clues to past civilizations among sedimentary rocks. Schmidt and his team are working on various scenarios on how these traces can be found and interpreted. As a result, scientists are looking for similarities between prehistoric warm periods and today's human-induced climate change, and trying to understand how these similarities can affect the development of intelligent life forms. However, more research and evidence is needed to reach a definitive conclusion on this matter. These studies can help us better understand humanity's place and impact in the planet's history.